Welcome back. It's time to finish expanding harmonic areas with 6/4 chords. You've already watched part 1. Now this is part 2. In the first part, we covered cadential 6/4s and neighboring or pedal 6/4s. So now in part 2, we'll be covering arpeggiating 6/4 chords or passing 6/4 chords. The arpeggiating 6/4 chord is an embellishment in the bass that just runs through the notes of a triad, like an arpeggio. At the moment that the fifth of the triad is in the bass, it forms a 6/4 chord. Let me show you an example. This part of my country 'tis of thee features an arpeggiating 6/4 chord. Notice over here, just by arpeggiating the bass, we momentarily form an F major chord with the fifth, C, in the bass. And then what you heard me play afterwards was doing the same thing, but on the dominant seventh, C7, instead of on the F major chord. That's one kind of arpeggiating 6/4 chord. We don't really talk about resolving it since the harmony doesn't change, and it's just a momentary fifth of the chord in the bass. We also get this when we hear an umpa bass. Whether it's a polka like that or a waltz. In that case, when the fifth of the chord is in the bass, it's an arpeggiating 6/4 as well. Very simple, since we just keep the same harmony, we don't worry about where the upper voices are moving. And finally, there's the passing 6/4 chord. When we're connecting the bass of a 1 to a 1/6, for example, we can fill in the gap in the bass with a passing tone, because the bass notes of the 1 and the 1/6 are a third apart. If we harmonize the passing tone, we can actually use a 6/4 chord, and then the bass note is the fifth of the triad that we get. Of course, as usual, we double the bass. We have no skips or leaps into or out of this chord. I'll show you a 1 to a 5/6/4 to a 1/6, and then we can look at another version that goes in the other direction as well. Let's see what this looks like in G major. So here we are in G, and we want to go from a 1 to a 1/6. Normally, if I did this that way, I might possibly have something like this. And now going there. So far, so good. We can fill in the gap. But without putting another chord there. Or what I'm suggesting is we can take that middle beat and make it a 6/4 chord. In this particular case, In G, a 5 is a D major chord, but this is going to be second inversion. So D, F sharp, A, the A is in the bass. And notice the way this works. Like most passing tones we've seen, the 6/4 is in a weak position rhythmically. These are more accented. We doubled the bass. Here's A. Here's another one. When we use the passing 6/4 very often, it facilitates a voice exchange. Here, the bass and soprano are swapping notes, bass going eventually from G to B, the soprano going eventually from B to G instead. To show you that this can work on another triad, let's go from a 4/6 to a 4 chord in this same key. A 4 chord is C major, so the third of that will be E. We're going to go to C, so we'll put in our passing tone. And it turns out this chord in between is a 1/6/4. That's not the 1/6/4 that we saw on the cadential 6/4, because we're not expanding a 5 chord, we're expanding the predominant 4, and this 6/4 chord is unaccented. So what happens here? We might have something like that. Changed my mind. Decided this works better with the alto being on C also. So what happens on the 1/6/4, the G stays, the alto can go to D, tenor to B, and then we go to a root position 4 chord. Notice, by the way, that on this 6/4, the D, the bass is doubled. It's a G major chord in second inversion. We still have our voice exchange. E, D, C in the bass, C, D, E in the alto, and all of this expands the predominant 4. That's how the passing 6/4 chord works. We'll look at examples in class.